moves us closer toward that goal. It's a common sense amendment, again, taking the President's executive order and memorandum of today and actually putting it into force through the force of law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, I rise to discuss the ongoing negotiations on the federal budget and our rapidly approaching debt ceiling. I think we all here agree that the situation we face is increasingly grave. I believe every responsible person agrees that a failure to act on the debt limit would have awful repercussions and set back our fragile and tentative economic recovery. Surpassing the debt limit could inflict a triple economic harm on our struggling economy. The economic harm of pulling 40 cents out of every federal dollar all at once out of the economy. The economic harm of shutting down every work project that depends on federal permits, contracts, or regulatory approvals. And the economic harm of driving up interest rates for our constituents and for our country. We must therefore act, and act quickly, to ensure that we avoid that outcome. I also believe that the debt limit presents an opportunity to make some tough decisions on our unsustainable deficits. The longer we wait to make these choices, the harder they will be. It is my strong belief that any agreement we reach to reduce the deficits must be based on real savings and must not be made at the expense of our most vulnerable citizens. That is why I'm so concerned about reports that Social Security and Medicare benefits have been raised as possible sources of deficit reduction. Cuts to Social Security and to Medicare benefits are unnecessary, are wrong, and should not be on the table. Social Security is not the cause of the deficit, and beneficiaries of Social Security should not be made to shoulder the burden of deficit reduction. A balanced deficit reduction package is certainly within our grasp. I want to commend our chairman, Senator Conrad, chairman of the Budget Committee, for his proposal, which would cut the deficit by $4 trillion over the next decade. His plan would cut the deficit by more than the House Republican budget, and it would do so without cutting Social Security or Medicare benefits. Chairman Conrad's blueprint would balance $2 trillion in spending cuts with an equal amount of tax loophole closers for wealthy individuals and corporations. His budget would call for shared sacrifice, not just go after the elderly and other vulnerable Americans. We should not, as Americans, balance the budget on the backs of those who can least afford it. That is why today I rise to offer a resolution expressing the sense of the Senate that any budget agreement should not include cuts to Social Security or Medicare benefits. Social Security is funded through the contributions of our nation's workers and businesses. It currently has a trust fund balance over $2.5 trillion and is projected to be fully solvent for another quarter century. So while I'd agree with steps to strengthen Social Security, it's a vital program. Any changes should be considered independent of this effort to reduce the deficit, and under no circumstances should we cut Social Security benefits. Indeed, the solvency of the program can be extended significantly just by applying payroll taxes to a greater portion of the earnings of millionaires and billionaires. What we should never do is to put elderly Americans' security at risk in the stock market, or increase the retirement age, or cut benefits through backdoor methods such as lowering the cost of living adjustment. Mr. President, like you, I've heard from hundreds of folks from my home state, Rhode Islanders who agree with me, and particularly the Rhode Island seniors that I've listened to at community dinners and senior centers throughout the state, who are concerned that they have already gone 2 years without a cost of living adjustment when prices are going up all around them. Audrey from Middletown told me that after her husband died, she had many expenses but no income except for his Social Security check, which enabled me to go on living, she said, simply but adequately, without being a burden on my sons and losing my dignity as well. Ronald from Cumberland, Rhode Island, has been on Social Security for a number of years. He wrote me to say, "It seems that it's always the people who need the help the most who get cut from the federal government. Why is this? No Social Security COLA for 2 years, yet prices for the basic needs still rise? In a country like the United States of America, this should not happen." The threat to Medicare is just as real. Earlier this year, House Republicans passed a budget that would in 10 years put an end to the Medicare program as we know it. Estimates suggest that their proposal would end up forcing a typical 65-year-old senior to pay on average $12,500 each year in out-of-pocket expenses starting in 2022, more than double what a senior is estimated to pay under the current system. In Rhode Island, where the average senior only gets about $14,200 per year from Social Security, charging an average $12,500 for seniors would be an exercise in poverty creation. The Republican budget would also throw seniors right away in the next year back into the Medicare prescription drug donut hole that we have just begun closing through the Affordable Care Act. And it would eliminate the life-saving preventive services that were added by that health care reform law. Cutting Medicare benefits is the wrong approach to balancing our budget, especially while Republicans continue fighting to protect every single tax break, every single loophole, every single earmark in the tax code enjoyed by millionaires and billionaires and by corporations, many of which pay no taxes at all. Medicare and Social Security are cornerstones of our nation's prosperity, and they benefit all of us. These programs allow Americans to live their lives free from worry about their retirement security or the welfare and health treatment of their parents. This American freedom is a value we should fight to protect. While we should always be open to improving these vital programs, we must not cut the benefits our seniors and disabled Americans have earned and rely upon. I'd like to thank Senators Blumenthal, Sanders, Senator Sherrod Brown, yourself, the presiding officer, Senator Merkley, and Senator Franken for their support in co-sponsoring this resolution. And I hope that my colleagues will join us in protecting the promise we have made to our nation's seniors through Social Security and Medicare. In closing, Mr. President, the challenge before us is a formidable one, but I truly believe we can reach an agreement on the deficit and debt ceiling without compromising the security and well-being of our seniors. I thank the Chair, and I yield the floor. On the pending motion, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Balkis, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy.
Well, I spent the weekend in your beautiful state. And it just was so much fun. The wind was down in the wind. The highest winds I said we've had in a couple of years, 50 miles an hour. Which was challenging for golf. That's like God. That's the way God meant golf to be played.
Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin.
Council did y'all a good job when you did that.
Mr. Lieberman.
Flip it back.
Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Bennett, Bingaman, Burr, Cantwell, Conrad, Corker, Cornyn, Inouye, Johans, Johnson of South Dakota, Kirk, Klobuchar, Cole, Kyle, Leahy, Levin, McCaskill, Merkley, Mikulski, Rockefeller, Sanders, Sessions, Stabenow, Udall of New Mexico, White House. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Franken, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Ayotte, Chambliss, Crapo, Enzi, Grassley, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johnson of Wisconsin, Nelson of Nebraska, Portman. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Coburn, no. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Paul, no. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Hatch, no. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mr. Cochran, no. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Lugar, no. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Kerry, aye. Mr. Coates, aye. Ms. Snow, aye. Mr. Toomey, Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Wicker, no. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Dement, no. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mrs. Boxer, aye. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Roberts, no. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. Begich, aye. Mrs. Hutchison, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Udall, Colorado. Mr. Udall, Colorado, aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye.
Do I say? Yeah. Are there any senators wishing to vote or change their vote? If not, on this motion, we have 69 yeas, 27 nays. The motion to proceed is passed. Majority Leader.
Could we have order in the Senate, please?
Order in the Senate. Please. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President.
Clerk will report the pending motion.
Thank you.
Motion.
Calendar number 93, S1323, a bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving the budget deficit.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
the Senate has just adopted the motion to proceed to our bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice.
Senate be in order.
Mr. President, the Senate has just adopted the motion to proceed to our bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving this budget deficit that we've been so concerned about. It's my understanding that the minority has amendments that they would like to have considered. I'm happy to work with the Republican leader to figure out a way for this to happen. In the meantime, however, I need to push forward. We all need to push forward. So I'm going to fill the tree and file cloture on this bill. But I'm happy to continue to talk with the Republican leader and anyone else that's interested in having specific amendments to this legislation that we're now on. I'm not going to allow this legislation to be dogged down by endless list of unrelated amendments. It's too important for the Senate to reaffirm its commitment to ensuring all Americans, including millionaires and billionaires and profitable corporations, contribute to collective effort to reduce this deficit. Please. This is common sense that we should believe in simple fairness. Middle-class families and seniors have already been asked to sacrifice too much. Democrats have gone on record saying that wealthiest of the wealthy should be asked to contribute to this effort and make similar sacrifices. We hope our Republican colleagues will finally join us in this effort. Over the past several weeks, I've had good conversations with the Republican leader and the chairman and ranking member of the Appropriations Committee about trying to work through appropriation bills under regular order. As a result of these conversations, Mr. President, in an effort to move forward, I'm going to file cloture on a motion to proceed to the military construction VA appropriations bill tonight. Hope that we can show the Senate that and the country that we can work through an important appropriation bill without getting bogged down. Remember, there's different rules on these matters. You can't deal with legislative matters on appropriation bill. So I would hope that we can have some amendments on our sense of the Senate resolution dealing with having the wealthiest of the wealthiest contribute to our problems we have in this country with the deficit. And following that, I hope that we can move to military construction VA. Our servicemen need this. Our veterans who have served our country so well, they're certainly in need of our help. So, Mr. President, I have an amendment which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes an amendment numbered 529. At the end, the following new section, Section 2, effective date. This provision of this act shall become effective 3 days after enactment.
Mr. President, on this amendment, I will ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There is a sufficient second. To be. Yeas and nays are ordered.
I now have a second-degree amendment at the desk, Mr. President.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes an amendment numbered 530 to amendment number 529. Okay.
Mr. President, I have a motion to commit the bill with instructions, which is also at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
The senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, moves to commit the bill as 1323 to the Committee on Finance with instructions to report back forthwith with an amendment numbered 531.
I would ask for the yeas and nays on this, Mr. President.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Yeas and nays have been ordered.
I have an amendment to the instructions at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes an amendment numbered 532 to the instructions of the motion to commit.
I ask for the yeas and nays on this amendment.
Is there sufficient second? There appears to be.
I have a second-degree amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, proposes an amendment numbered 533 to amendment numbered 532.
I have a cloture motion at the desk. Ask the
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on S. 1323, a bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving the budget deficit, signed by 17 senators as follows: Reed of Nevada, Durbin, Murray, Inouye, Coons, Whitehouse, Boxer, Casey, Sanders, Lautenberg, Brown of Ohio, Reed of Rhode Island, Feinstein, Merkley, Cardin, Levin, Schumer.
Mr. President, I now move to proceed to count number 91, H.R. 2055.
Clerk will report the motion to proceed.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 91, H.R. 2055, an act making appropriations for military construction, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and so forth, and for other purposes.
I have a cloture motion at the desk, Mr. President.
Clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 91, H.R. 2055, an act making appropriations for military construction, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes, signed by 18 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the mandatory quorum required under Rule 22 be waived with respect to both cloture motions.
Without objection.
I now withdraw my motion to proceed.
Motion's withdrawn.
President, I would ask unanimous consent that we now proceed to period of morning business and is allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to honor one of Colorado's great educators and community leaders, David Getches, who passed away on Tuesday, July 5th, 2011, at the too young age of 68. Mr. President, this is more than a poignant moment for me. I had planned to come to the floor and discuss David Getches' career and character because he was stepping down after 8 very productive years as the Dean of the University of Colorado Law School. And we all have had this terrible experience in our lives where somebody who we love and respect suddenly finds that they have a cancer that's aggressive, beyond aggressive. And just literally a month ago, David was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And in the 4 weeks since that time and today, that cancer stole him from us. But he was always upbeat. He was always someone who we looked to for enthusiasm and inspiration. And I'll be inspired in my remarks here today by what he did, and I'll attempt to not dwell on his loss. As I said, Dean Getches served as the Dean of the University of Colorado Law School for the last 8 years. And with him at the helm, CU Law School, the University of Colorado Law School, became one of the most forward-looking institutions of legal training in the country. And I want to share a few examples of his vision and leadership. I couldn't cover all of those examples if I had a full hour, but I want to share some of them with the Senate and with his friends and admirers in Colorado. He steered the school through the construction of the new LEED certified Wolf Law Building, which put CU and its law school at the cutting edge of environmental sustainability and energy efficiency, 2 ideas that were intimately connected to the values that Getches was committed to fostering throughout his career. Getches had served previously as the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources and as an advisor to the Interior Secretary in the Clinton administration. And he had an extensive background in water, environmental, and public lands law. Through his work, Getches impressed upon all Coloradans the importance of good stewardship of our state's precious natural resources. Mr. President, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that Dean Getches' efforts to teach and share the legal framework that protects our resources could not have been more critical to preserving our Western way of life. David Getches also left a lasting impression on the demographic composition of CU Law School. He was committed to a student body composed of people from many different backgrounds and cultures, and that commitment made an indelible impact on the school and on Colorado's legal community. In 2008, the Hispanic Bar Association awarded him their Community Service Award for increasing Hispanic enrollment, and he also assembled one of the most diverse administrative teams of any law school in the country. He didn't stop there, however. He then created a commission to produce a groundbreaking report on diversity in the legal profession and how to increase diversity in law firm recruitment. And the highly skilled and diverse alumni of the CU Law School reflect his efforts and his successes. David Getches also built a legacy of equal access to legal education for all. He worked to expand scholarships and financial aid awarded by the law school to worthy students regardless of their financial background, increasing scholarship awards from $600,000 in 2004 to a hefty $2.1 million in 3 short years by 2007. In 2008, he worked with the Colorado State Legislature to pass a law allowing public universities to offer loan repayment assistance grants to graduates practicing public interest law, and more recently founded an endowment toward grants to CU Law School graduates in the public sector. And what Dean Getches did by reducing the cost of law school was make public service a viable alternative to private practice for bright, idealistic graduates of the law school. Without question, those students, CU Law School, the state of Colorado, I'd venture to say the country, will reap the benefits in the future from David Getches' foresight and thoughtful investments.
At the heart of why I wanted to come to the floor today, Mr. President, was that I think we all can learn from Dean David Getches' passion for giving back to whatever community in which he found himself. He led a life of service, and he also compiled an impressive academic record, as well as serving as the Dean of the CU Law School. And he was at his core committed to the future of his children, our grandchildren, and his grandchildren. And he had a deep love for the Rocky Mountain Western way of life. He was an avid outdoorsman. He was fit. Any physical challenge he faced, just like he faced intellectual and emotional challenges. As I said in my beginning remarks, he was a mentor to all of us. And he always had his eye on the future. And I know, as painful as it is for all of us who knew him to lose him so suddenly, he would want us to be focused on the future. Dean Getches did this and much more for Colorado and our country, and I just want to close with this, Mr. President. We've lost a unique man and a towering Colorado figure. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President. Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, the situation involving the need for a budget and the situation involving the need to raise the debt limit for the United States is getting more and more crucial, it seems, by the hour. I have been a firm and consistent critic of this idea that's been developing the last several years in the Congress that a few people meet in closed, secret meetings and somehow reach a decision that I'm supposed to assume is good and decent and ought to be confirmed by a vote here in the Senate. And I feel that there are 100 senators, and some a lot smarter and more capable than I, but I feel a personal sense of obligation and duty to ensure that when I vote on an important piece of legislation that my constituents care about, that I know what's in it, and I understand what's in it. And it's hard to know. And you have a bill that comes out that proposes to have changes in the trillions of dollars involving federal spending for a decade in a budget or some other fashion. It requires us to be careful about that. So I would express again my dissatisfaction and belief that this Senate, not the House really, the Senate has failed in its duty to participate in an open process concerning our budget. The House of Representatives did. The Republican House promised to have open hearings. They had a bill on the floor, a budget. They passed it within the time required by April 15th. It completely changed the debt trajectory of America, puts us on a sound footing. It reduced spending by $6 trillion, not 2, 6. And it didn't raise taxes on the American people. In fact, it reduced taxes in a way that they felt would engender better economic growth, which is the best way to engender more tax revenue, is having more people make more money and pay more taxes. So the House, I really believe, fulfilled their constitutional duty. Well, in the Senate, we've now gone well over 800 days without a budget. We didn't have a budget when our Democratic colleagues had 60 senators, the highest number that one party has had in probably 70, 80 years, maybe longer. They didn't pass a budget. You can pass a budget with 50 votes, 51 votes. With the Vice President, 50 votes. It's a simple majority. It's an expedited procedure. Budgets are passed by parties when they only had one vote majority in the Senate. So I would say that it's an odd thing that we've gone 2 years without a budget. But it's not odd that, in part because of that no budget, We've seen the largest surges of debt the nation has ever seen. President Bush was criticized for running up debt. He had, in one year, his last year, $450 billion deficit, and was roundly criticized for it. Some of that was his TARP money that they scored as money spent, and it was properly, accurately scored. So it came out $450 billion. The year before was a $160 billion deficit. President Obama's first budget deficit was $1,200 billion. $1,200 billion. His next budget, $1,300 billion. This year's budget, by September 30th, is projected to be around $1,500 billion. We haven't had a budget. Is anything connected there? And so I want to say, first of all, one of the ways that you act responsibly is when you do it out in the front of the people. I noticed President Obama today at the press conference, when asked about some of these matters, pushed back and said, well, we want to have an agreement right now. We don't want to wait any later close to the election. And he was basically saying, it's pretty clear, really, I'm not exaggerating anything. He was basically saying when you get close to the election, senators and congressmen don't like to vote for more debt, and they don't like to vote for more taxes. So what's wrong with that? American people don't want debt. They don't want taxes. They want us to bring this government under control. But that's what they're suggesting. Oh, it's politics. Something corruptly political if you believe that you shouldn't bail out the big spenders in Washington by taking more money from hardworking Americans and taking it out of the private sector to give to the public sector that's mismanaged the money that they have. Well, Jeff, you had these big deficits. It's because y'all cut taxes. We haven't cut taxes in years. President Bush cut taxes. Revenue is much higher today than when those taxes were cut. We've gone into an economic decline, and this recession has reduced our income. That is true. It's not so much the rate of taxes, it's the rate of profit. It's the rate of income. It's the rate of money that people are being paid. And so they don't have as much money and they're not paying as much taxes. Now we can run around and find anybody that's left with money and try to tax them, but at some point that begins to be self-defeating. So I guess I'm trying to raise the point. How did we get here? Well, there's another way we got here, these huge deficits that we had. In the Keynesian philosophy of economics, we had a big spending bill called the stimulus bill. I opposed it. I remember reading Nobel laureate Professor Becker at the University of Chicago's piece not long before the vote saying it was not going to create jobs. It was not sufficiently stimulative to be a good stimulus bill. Fact, in his mind, as a thoroughgoing Nobel Prize winning economist. And that's exactly what happened. It didn't create jobs. It went to social programs. It went to state aid. It went to things other than the infrastructure that we were told it was going for. Only 4% of that money went to roads and bridges. 4% out of $850 billion. Every penny borrowed to create, stimulate jobs, they said. We're going to redo our infrastructure, they said. It was not done that way. It was social spending overwhelmingly. And it didn't create growth in economics, in the economy. So And then another reason we have the debt is because the baseline spending was surged under the Democratic leadership and President Obama. Non-defense. Defense Department's gone up 3 or so % the last couple of years in spending. Non-defense, discretionary spending, the things that we do like energy programs and road programs and aid and grants and things we spend around, that went up 24% in 2 years. And we were having a drop-off in income, drop-off in tax revenue, and we increased spending dramatically. We never had 10, 12% increases in spending a year. And hold your hat, the budget that the President submitted to us in I believe February of this year, several months ago, proposed increases for the Education Department of 10.5%, proposed increases for the State Department 10.5%, 9.5% for the Energy Department, and 60% increase for the transportation high-speed rail projects. We don't have the money. All of that would have been borrowed. We couldn't sustain flat spending without borrowing money. We're so far in debt. 40 cents of every dollar we spend today is borrowed. So I have been a big critic of this scheme to meet behind closed doors, not tell the rest of the Congress or the American people what we're doing, and to plop down on the floor of the Senate some proposed deal that we have to sign at the 11th hour or the government's going to shut down. Why haven't we been talking about this? They talked about it in the House. They voted on it. They reduced spending $6 trillion. Our people are saying, claiming in the phantom budget that's been talked about by our Democratic colleagues, one they never produced so it can actually be accounted for, they claim it would reduce spending $2 trillion, and they're patting themselves on the back about how great they are. But when you take out the interest savings that occur, it's only $1.4 trillion in actual reduction of spending. And it's a 2.7, we estimate, increase in taxes. Now, Senator Conrad, the chairman of the Budget Committee, and our presiding officer, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, is a member of the Budget Committee, as I am, the ranking Republican on it. He does a good job. He is a smart man. He understands, I think, the threat America faces. I have thought he did, although the budget proposal, this phantom secret budget that they just leak out descriptions of whenever it's convenient, has not impressed me, really. It just hadn't been impressive. Is it a vision? Is it a specter of some kind of a budget that nobody can ever grasp their hands around? And it's only what the people who are holding it close to their vest say it is, and all the rest of us have to accept that? I don't think so. Let me tell you, I have become very, very uneasy about what we hear in this city of Washington about plans and policies. When President Obama announced his budget, it was the most irresponsible budget this country has ever been presented with by a president. I don't think anybody can dispute that. I'm prepared to defend that against anybody who says so. It increased spending, increased taxes. Over a decade, it increased taxes, it increased spending, and made the deficit worse than if we hadn't done anything. At a time when the nation should have been working from January till today, figuring out how to bring this government under control and contain the growth in spending and contain the debt. He announced, this is what he said, and his budget director at the committee said, Mr. Lieu, that our budget calls on us to live within our means and pay down the debt. And the Congressional Budget Office scored the budget. They analyzed it over 10 years. The lowest single annual deficit that was occurring during that time was $750 billion. The lowest deficit, almost half again higher than President Bush's highest deficit. And it starts going up in the out years, 8, 9, and 10, to back to over $1 trillion in the 10th year annual deficit. Interest on that debt that would be accrued by such an irresponsible budget would go from around $200 billion last year, or 240 some odd this year, to $940 billion in 1 year. That would be larger than Medicare, larger than Social Security, larger than the defense budget, including the war. Much larger than those. So interest is a danger. Now, Senator Conrad talked this afternoon about his phantom budget, and he told us a lot of things he wanted us to know about it, and he articulated in a way that made you think that's not such a bad idea, but we've got real number people. Just like President Obama said his budget was going to pay down the debt and cause us to live within our means when it had no deficit lower than $740 billion. So he said it's a blueprint. He said it's a framework. But he didn't say it was a budget, because it's not a budget. A budget is a document that can be read, ascertained, evaluated, and scored. So they leaked to the Washington Post, not to the members of colleagues of the Senate here. He leaked to the Washington Post some of the good things he wanted it to get out, and then they talk about some of the good things here today. Forgive me if I'm not impressed. If there's such a good budget, why don't you print it up and propose it to us? That's what the House of Representatives did. They prepared to defend their budget. And Senator Conrad said this, that he thought it could play a part in this big deal the President is talking about to change our debt trajectory in a positive way. Well, those words are good words, just like the President's statement that he had a budget that was going to cause us to live within our means and pay down our debt. That's what he said. That's what his budget director said. Well, you can say things that make it true. I can say I don't have a desk in my hand. But I've got a desk in my hand, reality being what it is, you know. So that was not a good budget he submitted, and I'm worried about this phantom budget that we're hearing about today, frankly. So the way we calculate this phantom budget and the things that have been released about it, it would raise taxes as much as $2.8 trillion and cut spending about 4% over the 10 years. This is a 10-year budget, at a time when we are projected to add, under the President's plan, $13 trillion to our national debt. So we're going to reduce the debt by 4%, from $13 trillion, an utterly unsustainable figure. The House budget, as I said, would cut discretionary spending $6 trillion. The Toomey plan would have cut spending $8 trillion. And Senator Conrad actually said on the Senate floor that his budget, which raises taxes as I indicated, he said it would reduce taxes by $700 billion. He said it would reduce taxes by $700 billion. Now, how is this accounting accomplished? this trick, I would suggest, accomplished? Well, to get to that number, he's obviously comparing it to a CBO, Congressional Budget Office baseline, which assumed that every single tax rate from 2001 and 2003 tax cuts that have been in place now almost a decade are going to expire, and all those rates go up. So he's saying if he keeps a little of them from going up, he's cut taxes. Only in Washington can you raise taxes dramatically, change the tax rates that have been in place for a decade, see taxes go up dramatically, and call that a tax cut. And by the way, baseline is very important. We don't know what baseline that the chairman of the Budget Committee is using. He understands it very well. He's one of the most knowledgeable, capable members of our body, and he understands these well. I believe the phrase he used was, it's a plausible baseline. A plausible baseline. Well, let me tell you the baseline we should use. The baseline, when you talk about whether or not spending increases or whether spending decreases, should be what you're spending today. And if you're spending $100 billion today, if you spend 102, you've spent $2 billion more. If you spend 98, you're spending $2 billion less, right? Well, what they do in Washington, and the reason this country is so close to bankruptcy, is they assume growth rates, baseline growth rates. And then when you reduce the baseline growth rate, and it's going up $10 billion next year, and you reduce that increase to 9, you claim you cut spending by $1 billion. And it went up 9. Now, that's the kind of logic that has put us in the difficult position we're in. So I have decided and told my staff on the Budget Committee, when we get numbers, we're going to compare it to the only thing that's solid, and that's a level baseline. Does it go up or does it go down? In fact, the Ryan House budget that cut $6 trillion still increases spending. It's not a real cut. So you do have to figure out how much you're talking about and what baseline you're using to know what the numbers are. And the best way to do that, the most objective way to do that, is use a flatline number and see whether we're up or down. And then we can communicate. But if you get to choose your baseline, and CBO has one, the President has another one, looks like the Senate Democrats have chosen another one. They call it a plausible baseline. I don't know what that means. The Debt Commission that had their recommendation for reducing debt, they chose another baseline. And it makes it hard to know. So when you talk about a budget that's supposed to really make a difference in our economy, and you propose $2 in tax increases for every $1 in spending cuts, and suggest this is the kind of thing that you're working with the President on their negotiations, maybe we can begin to understand why the members of the House and members of the Senate who have been in these meetings have been walking out of these meetings and saying all they want to do is raise taxes. Now, the President himself said several months ago he thought $3 of spending cuts and $1 of tax increases would be a good mix. But what we're hearing today is $2 of tax increase to $1 of spending cuts. That's not acceptable. Has no chance of passage, and if the American people have time to read that kind of legislation and find out that's what it's in it, they're not going to be happy with anybody that supports it, in my view. So perhaps that's the reason they want to wait till the 11th hour, claim the country is about to shut down, and try to force it through. You know, as the President suggested, you don't want to get it too close to the election when people might remember what you did to them. And goodness gracious, they talk about a $900 billion cut in the Defense Department. That's part of their plan, too. Well, let me just tell you how that gimmick works. You propose a $900 billion cut in Defense Department, and you know that almost $20% cut is not going to become law, but you go out and tell the public you saved $900 billion. You plan to cut it from the Defense Department, and you can't cut that much money from the Defense Department. So no wonder our retiring fine Senator Joe Lieberman, after the Democratic discussions of this, was moved to say, quote, he was worried about what such a budget would do to our national security, close quote. Well, he should be. I've been on the Armed Services Committee. I don't deny that the military has got to tighten its belt just like every other department of this government. It may even have to take a real reduction in spending, but we're not going to have a 18-20% reduction. It can't be, we're going to have our men and women who place their lives on the line for us, want to have them have to pay for profligacy in Washington? I don't think so. Well, Mr. President, I would ask Majority Leader Reid, who I believe is the strategist in the Senate, who told our chairman, Senator Conrad, that he should not bring up a budget. I think Senator Conrad was prepared to bring up a budget. He was working on one. His staff was working on one. We were within days of a markup. He was going to produce a budget. Those of us on the Republican side had amendments to offer, and we were preparing for a debate. And they decided not to have it, all of a sudden, not to have a markup. And later, Senator Reid said it would be foolish to produce a budget. I'd say it would be foolish for the Congress of the United States to take a paycheck to operate the way we're operating when 40 cents of every dollar we spend is borrowed. That is just unthinkable. How did we get in this position where we're spending $3,700 billion and taking in only $2,200 billion? And all of the difference is borrowed. And finally, this is really important. A lot of us have heard these numbers, but it has not resonated with us about how important they are. Professors Rogoff and Reinhardt have written a book called This Time It's Different, studying 8 centuries of sovereign governmental default on their debts, the kind of things Greece is going through today. And they've analyzed how it happened and the consequences, and they chose a name because they said every time politicians that ran up debt in their country to high levels and caused a crisis said, well, it won't happen to us. This time it's different. We're different than those other countries that went belly up. And then it happens just like that. Savagely, immediately, like the financial crisis that hit us in 2007, 2008. And what they concluded in further study was something else. Not only when you get your debt too high do you run the risk of a financial crisis, but your debt slows your economic growth, and that countries who have deficits, debts that equal 90% of the economy. See, my good friend Senator Reid with the toughest job in Washington, and I'm not making it any easier for him. It would be good for him to hear this. I think he knows it, but they have concluded when your debt, total American debt, reaches 90% of our economy, our GDP, and goes above that, it pulls down your economic growth by 1%. The CBO now is scoring our growth to come in at 0.9% below what it otherwise would be because of our debt. The first quarter we had 2% economic growth. If we'd had 3% economic growth, that would be a 50% increase in growth. If we'd had 1% greater increase in growth, that would amount to, according to the White House economic team some time ago, an increase of 1 million jobs in America. So I guess what I'm saying is we've erroneously stated too often, I think, that the question is about our children and grandchildren. I truly believe that the sluggish growth and the very, very weak job numbers that we've been having is a result of carrying too much debt. And we've got to start reducing that debt, even if it's painful for us to do so. I hope my colleagues will produce a budget that will actually change the numbers. I'm not confident that will happen. Failing that, I do hope, Mr. Leader, and I say this to my leader too, that if a bill is brought forth in the Senate, we have at least 7 days to consider it before we're asked to vote on it. I really believe it'll take that long to properly evaluate it. Mr. President, I see the majority leader here. It's always a pleasure to work with him, and would yield.